Okay, hi, this is Alex Romanovich, and welcome to Global Edge Markets roundtable discussion on tariffs, trade, logistics, e-commerce, and AI. Today, I'm welcoming our guest panel, Ala Sims, representing tariffs and trade, Pavlo Kobzar, representing logistics and distribution, John Bancroft, representing e-commerce and retail, and Ankit Shah, representing AI technologies, integration of all these different components. And I'm going to go first through the introduction of our panelists, and then we will start a discussion, which is extremely important, very timely, and very strategic at the moment. Just a few words about Global Edge Markets. We work at the intersection of innovation and growth globally. And if past few years have taught us anything, is that global trade and global commerce is not just about moving goods across the border or across the state lines and what have you. The environment is becoming so complex, especially when it is being complicated by changing shifts in tariffs, in regulation, in international relations, and a few other components like that. The e-commerce, the trade, is being reshaped, and the consumer expectations and consumer loyalties are making it even more complex, especially when we're dealing with direct-to-consumer type of relationships. Of course, on top of it, we also have business-to-business relationships, and this is how all those pieces get interconnected. So today, our challenge is to unpack all of these complexities. Our challenge is to demystify these complexities, and we have an amazing panel of experts to help us do that. Let me go through a few introductions. Let me start with John Bancroft. John spent his entire career helping retailers and brands go global and also expanding, growing, and optimizing their operations. He's worked for companies in executive roles such as Toys R Us, eBay, and then later on with his company, Go Global Retail and JCAS. He's guided a number of different private equity firms and e-commerce and retail organizations globally, from the boardroom all the way down to the shop floor, to inventory management systems, integrations, and so forth. John, welcome to our studio.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
Continuing with Pavlo Kobzar, who is a logistics and distribution expert through and through. He's now not only a partner in the... Okay, hi, this is Alex Romanovich, and welcome to Global Edge Markets roundtable discussion on tariffs, trade, logistics, e-commerce, and AI. Today, I'm welcoming our guest panel, Ala Sims, representing tariffs and trade, Pavlo Kobzar, representing logistics and distribution, John Bancroft, representing e-commerce and retail, and Ankit Shah, representing AI technologies, integration of all these different components. And I'm going to go first through the introduction of our panelists, and then we will start a discussion, which is extremely important, very timely, and very strategic at the moment. Just a few words about Global Edge Markets. We work at the intersection of innovation and growth globally. And if past few years have taught us anything, is that global trade and global commerce is not just about moving goods across the border or across the state lines and what have you. The environment is becoming so complex, especially when it is being complicated by changing shifts in tariffs, in regulation, in international relations, and a few other components like that. The e-commerce, the trade, is being reshaped, and the consumer expectations and consumer loyalties are making it even more complex, especially when we're dealing with direct-to-consumer type of relationships. Of course, on top of it, we also have business-to-business relationships, and this is how all those pieces get interconnected. So today, our challenge is to unpack all of these complexities. Our challenge is to demystify these complexities, and we have an amazing panel of experts to help us do that. Let me go through a few introductions. Let me start with John Bancroft. John spent his entire career helping retailers and brands go global and also expanding, growing, and optimizing their operations. He's worked for companies in executive roles such as Toys R Us, eBay, and then later on with his company, Go Global Retail and JCAS. He's guided a number of different private equity firms and e-commerce and retail organizations globally, from the boardroom all the way down to the shop floor to inventory management systems, integrations, and so forth. John, welcome to our studio.
Thanks, Alec. It's great to be here.
Continuing with Pavlo Kobzar, who is a logistics and distribution expert through and through. He not only leads, he's now not only a partner in the multi-$100 million operation called LOGITY, where he is helping multiple companies moving goods across the borders. He's also in charge of their technology space and built a number of different forms in logistics, distribution, and trade. And he will absolutely help us with challenges and pressures that are taking place in global chains, global supply chains. Of course, he's very intimately involved with trucking. As we know, trucking is the bone, is the fiber of the American and Canadian and Mexican trade operations and logistics operations. So John will weigh in on logistics and distribution. Welcome. I'm sorry, not John. Pavlo will weigh in on logistics distribution. Pavlo, welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Alex, for having me.
Ala Sims is now representing tariffs and compliance. He not only is doing this for Komatsu, a multi-billion-dollar global manufacturer of mining equipment, infrastructure, manufacturing equipment, and so forth. She's also an expert and certified expert in a number of different export-import regulations. And, you know, there's no margin for error when you're moving billions of dollars of machinery across borders. So Ala is going to talk to us more about tariffs, the impact of tariffs, on the supply chain, on the last mile of trade, if you will, e-commerce and retail. Welcome, Ala, to our studio.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Alex, and happy to share the knowledge with the audience.
Awesome. And last but not least, Ankit Shah has been on the forefront of artificial intelligence and digital transformation for the past 20 years. Clearly, we can argue that AI maybe did not exist in its form today 20 years ago, but Ankit will probably even argue about that point as well. Ankit runs the growth organization of NetWeb Software, one of the fastest growing software and product development companies doing business globally. And Ankit will weigh in on how technology and digital transformation and AI transformation is impacting all of the things that we're going to be talking about. Ankit, welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, all.
So as you can see, we have an amazing lineup. And I suggest that we dive into a number of different challenges and we begin our conversation. Why don't we start with Ala first? Ala, the challenges of tariffs, and let's call them tariff regimes, right? United States, European Union, China, they constantly create and plan uncertainty, right? As we know, the Trump administration has been on the latest forefront of tariffs and tariff frameworks, if you will. On top of it, we're beginning to sort of understand better the compliance frameworks that increase the costs for logistics operators, for manufacturers, for e-commerce providers, retail providers. And on top of it, there's a volatility in currency, eroding margins, and complications when it comes to landed costs, forecasting, planning, optimization, and so forth. What is the biggest challenge today that a company, not necessarily Komatsu, but a company maybe of a smaller size that is doing business in the United States, what are the challenges that they're experiencing right now when it comes to tariffs and trade in general?
Yes, there's multiple of challenges. They're kind of interconnected. First, disruption of supply chains, of course, and inability to forecast and plan your supplies around the world, which are impacted by tariffs. And not only in the United States, but there's also retaliatory tariffs that other countries place on the U.S. and so on, which affect also exports out of the U.S. So challenges are in forecasting, challenges are in going and trying to see where you stand with your supply chain, if you should make any decisions on moving your supply chain between countries depending on the current tariff landscape that U.S. has with a certain country. And also there's disruptions in logistics because once, for example, the tariffs go down or are negotiated to be a lower rate, the demand for logistics goes up, and there's capacity issues, which Pavel will talk about later. So challenges are multiple, also compliance challenges and risk mitigating challenges. In such a fast-moving change in tariff landscape, you have to make sure you're compliant, which means you're, all the documentation and all the little, legislative, you're complying with all legislative current landscape in the US for importing as well. So, and you're ready to face all the possible audits from either customs or any other Bureau of Industry and Security, for example, that are within jurisdiction of imports or exports out of the US.
Sounds very complex. I guess the question is, before we tie all the pieces together and we look at tariffs right now individually, what can a company do to sort of institute or even consider what you and I call tariff engineering, if you will? Maybe you could say a few words about that. It's a fancy name. I love it very much. First of all, can they do something about it? Can they do something about this very complex environment? Maybe hiring people like yourself, or maybe diving deeper into it, or maybe building compliance and those types of tariff uncertainties into their business model and so forth. What could they do at the moment before we get to the logistics, the movement of goods and so forth and so on?
Yes, what they can do is, of course, compliance should be a part of business, any business, either small or big or multinational or any other. It is kind of your competitive advantage too, because you're complying with other regulations. But what they can do is always have a plan B. In this environment, is important to understand all your supply chain and somewhat forecast, what about if a plan A doesn't work? Do we have a plan B? Do we have a plan C? And so on. And plan B and C also can be variously profitable to you, but they should also be kind of within your business strategy. And tariff engineering is a fancy word, as you mentioned, and it involves complex expertise from tariff experts, and it involves getting your product up to such a level of tariff treatment that it would be favorable to be imported either from a certain location, or it can contain different materials that enjoy lower tariff treatment when they're imported to the US. So tariff engineering is an option, of course, at this time.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on down or next to the next point in the chain, if you will. So great. The company decided that they may re-optimize or optimize their purchasing capabilities or their options and so forth and so on. And now they decided to purchase the product or continue to do business with the same suppliers and so forth. However, now it needs to deliver those products through the chain. So let's enter the world of logistics. Pavlo, we're going to now talk to you about that. Some of the challenges that we're seeing in the industry is constant supply chain volatility. We're seeing changing fuel pricing, especially when it comes to trucking, especially when it comes to land type of operations. But we're also seeing some port costs, also caused by tariffs and so forth. New regulations for the drivers, maybe even driver shortages, maybe some labor disputes, customer demands, global disruptions, in localized areas. Tell us more what you're seeing from where you sit in terms of logistics chains, and how what's happening right now is impacting logistics.
Well, we can say that volatility is a new normal, as every day something happening, new tariffs coming, geopolitical crisis is happening, and regulations changing pretty often recently. So logistics is kind of shaping its new form from being conservative and a pretty stable industry to something resilient and something that can deal with daily changes. Speaking of fuel costs, like with all the wars happening in the world, in Ukraine, in Middle East, the crisis between China and US, and all this, like we'll keep seeing fuel prices rising and going down. Mostly rising, I think. It will affect trucking like the most, and every dollar increase in our delivery costs will affect customers almost immediately. I believe John will share insights on that part as well. So speaking of crises, like Red Sea crisis led to 20-30% cost increase for delivery overnight, which is like impacted heavily. At the same time, if you are the customer of such roads and you wrote your shipments like for 30% at least, you decrease your risks for like 50%. So not worst scenario, but everything leads to simple solution in most cases. Like you want less disruptions with shipping costs, you should nearshore, you should regionalize your supply chain. You want to save money on transportations, on your whole supply chain. You can choose slower mode of transportation, cheaper service, you save a lot. And that's what we can see happening in the market. Shippers are choosing slower modes of transportation, like rails instead of trucking, and they save a lot of money in this way. At the same time, in order to fight these disruptions, you should invest heavily in tech. With all the AI tools, you can automate many processes in your company and predict most of your risks, analyze it, and try to fight before they happen. At the same time, we can say that we are already in an era of visibility in logistics. I can see on the market that most of players are using global tools for tracking their freight from the manufacturer in China or any other country in Asia till it's been delivered to the shelves in the distribution centers or in the markets. And it helps to track your stocks in real time. You can see your inventory, you can see what is current demand on particular geography, and you can improve your cash flow, you can improve moving your inventories across the geo, and it also will save you a lot of resources. There is many changes in our industry. Speaking of driver shortages, I believe this year we have like 80,000 driver shortage. And with all these immigrations, new regulations issued by new administration, we're seeing real crisis in speaking of labor side. Because yesterday I've seen a video from one of the ICE locations showing like hundreds of trucks being detained there along with their drivers that are being detained and probably deported, I'm not sure. And it's like massive thing right now. Like hundreds of people are being detained and probably the trucks are gonna stay there for like long time until company will rehire someone and recover it. And it will affect the industry heavily. At the same time, demand on the market is decreased for almost 20% if you compare with previous years. So someone can say that the market is self-regulated altogether. Demand is decreasing and providers are on the market reducing. So I don't believe in self-regulations on the market. I can consider it more like a struggle for companies on the market. I can consider it as challenges for us as every year we are like, okay, we're at the bottom. Finally, we reached the bottom. Last 3 years, and every year we can see it's not bottom yet, and we can go deeper. Speaking of pricing, speaking of demand on the market, and I think, as I said at the beginning, it is new normal. And if you wanna be successful in the market, you need to be ready, face new challenges every day, and be ready to have solutions for almost anything.
It's just a small task, right, for everybody. Let's continue. This is very insightful, Pavel. I didn't even know that so many truckers and trucking companies are experiencing now detentions from ICE. And I know, for example, that some of the regulations, the burdens have been put on the companies to make sure that their drivers speak English properly and they have to take the tests and, and so forth and so on. And it's, it's incredible to see how much that impacts, how fragile this component of the trade is. Now let's move on to John. John, as we're seeing from Al and we're seeing from Pavel, the demand is going to decrease. Demand is decreasing, right? The volatility is increasing. The expectations on deliveries for e-commerce companies are now being challenged, if you will, and the consumers need to sort of curb their expectations as well. Mr. Trump recently said, listen, you don't need $10, you don't need $15, you can do away with $2, right? So does that mean the consumer, and we'll talk about B2B, we'll talk about businesses in general, but let's talk about consumers, right? The rising tariffs, the compliance burden, the burdens obviously raise costs. We're seeing the cost being raised on almost every category of product. They're shifting consumer expectations, cross-border complexities, and so forth. Where's the future? What is the immediate future of e-commerce and the retail?
Well, I think Pavel mentioned it well, is that every year, many folks think, oh, we're at the bottom, and then the following year it gets even more interesting. And I think, the glass is half full, it's half empty, depending on how you look at it, Alex. It is, yes, I agree with Pavel. It's a more challenging time than we've ever seen within e-commerce, but at the same time, that glass is half full. We also have the most interesting of times in e-commerce because of all these new challenges and the shifting earth beneath us. In terms of the challenges that we will see additional opportunities arising out of, there's about half a dozen of them, and I think you guys have touched on some of them, but I'd like to just clarify some more specifically related to e-commerce. Consumer acquisition cost, CAC, they're rising. It's more and more expensive to find the same consumer than it has ever been. Whereas years ago, you could easily get an X return for your marketing spend. Then we've gone down to around 5X. Now we're going down even below 5X into 3X. I'm seeing more companies, not less, willing to take a loss on their first customer order in order to capture a new customer, which means it extends out their lifetime value of their break even. So rising consumer costs are also making this environment more challenging, if not more interesting. The supply chain disruption, of course, is just all over the place. Freight costs are going up. We just heard freight is being disrupted in ways that were not anticipated previously, and that will ripple into e-commerce. We saw a lot of that during COVID, but we're seeing a new form of that through ICE detentions in the US and other supply chain disruptions elsewhere outside of the US market. Another very interesting, fast-moving place was privacy and data restrictions. Before, privacy was important. It always has been, but with the rise of the European privacy requirements and the evolving California privacy requirements, it's even more important than it ever has been, which means we need to retool much of our data and our internal processes to adhere to the privacy expectations that are either imposed on us as operators or expected of us from our customers. Data restriction 2 is now bleeding into AI, and we need to adopt to the new risks that are involved with exposing our data to very large open data sets and figure out how to govern our data so it's more secure than it ever was. So, very interesting yet challenging times. What does this mean? This means people are looking for more value now than ever before. It's more expensive simply to live, regardless of what market you're in. Things are just more expensive. They're harder to get. They're more expensive. And this intensified competition means our customers are looking for more value. They're still looking for great, unique products, but they want more value as part of the proposition, more than ever before. I think customers also still do expect that speed. They've become accustomed to nominated date and time delivery in Asia markets, to fast overnight delivery in Western markets. And so the challenge is to continue with that excellent service, but to navigate the speed bumps and twists and turns that are in the modern market. Our cross-border complexities are also pretty difficult, and I think getting more so with the new rules and barriers artificially they're going up amongst governments. We do need to navigate that better. Testing requirements are now higher than ever across countries. We need to be better testers. We need to be better planners for our business, for tax purposes. We need to understand shipping and logistics better. And then finally, with AI, I think innovation it's always been important, but I think it's accelerated to a point of a speed now that we haven't seen, Alex, before with AI and this absolute watershed moment with the dawn of AI being widely available to people, we have to start figuring that out. And I hope we can talk about that more today. But innovation is also still a challenge for most companies and probably many of our listeners today. I saw some data recently. 1 out of 10 users is still left unsatisfied with their purchase online. 89% internally of POCs, proof of concepts, they're not completed. And many POCs and AI POCs in specific are not actually very successful. 4 out of 5 POCs, proof of concepts, they never even make it to the market. So as teams and operators, I think we all need to just recircle back and probably do a better job about going after the art and science of innovation to factor in all these challenges that I mentioned and others that the panel has mentioned. Excuse me. And get over the innovation speed bumps and bring new innovation successfully to market.
John, thank you so much. Very insightful. I know that we only touched more on the consumer side of things, but quickly, can you just touch, you've deployed a number of different systems, many of them that are at the heart of the relationship between the e-commerce providers and also their suppliers, inventory management providers, and so forth, very complex systems that need to be integrated and so forth. Can you touch on maybe the B2B components and some of those relationships that are at the crux of the sort of a back-end systems that consumers don't even see? They kind of assume, things will get shipped, things that will get purchased, everything is going to be great, my credit cards are not going to be compromised, everything is going to be cool. But there's so much complexity in the back, Can you sort of tell us in a few words how that entire relationship, B2B relationship, how is that impacted by what's going on?
Well, that's such a great question. And, B2B is so important within e-commerce. It's fast moving because of the evolution of tech and whatnot. And what I'm seeing is a couple of really key important trends. One trend is that B2B now more than ever needs to catch up because of the fast moving changes in technology, the consumer experience, and data. You mentioned the PIM and setting up back-end systems. And, years ago, data was useful, then it became important. And now good, clean data is essential because it forms the backbone of efficiency and transparency and successful conversion ultimately for your business. And so, whereas before, many B2B companies didn't even have a PIM, a product information management database that carefully manages all the bits and bytes of information about a product. Now it's absolutely critical because it feeds all of your primary systems, your ERP, your back office systems, but it also supports all of your demand generation, because that good quality data gets piped into the marketing world and acquires new companies, and it enables visibility, enables conversion. It helps people find you. In its best case, it helps not only people find you, but now with AI, you need great data and great data presence for the LLMs to really do what they do best. And if you don't have a great data strategy and you're not operating efficiently enough, you probably do. And most B2B companies, I'd say, particularly in the mid-market, most B2B companies probably at this point do need outside expertise to navigate the updated modern world so they can have better data in the places that they need to do their business.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a wonderful segue into the next conversation with Ankit, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the connective tissue, or what we can call it a connective tissue, between the tariffs, logistics, and e-commerce strategies. And that's artificial intelligence. And that's obviously data and the integrity of this data. And before I let you talk, Ankit, I want to say a few words about some of the risks in terms of AI, because obviously we're like anything else, we have a lot of hype about artificial intelligence. Companies are still learning how to deploy AI, if you will, within the enterprise, within even mid and small size companies. And not only that, don't forget the legacy systems. Don't forget the systems that have been built for the past 20, 30, 40 years. The companies are still using. I mean, I was amazed that the companies are still using in the retail space. It's still using AS400 from IBM. My goodness, green screens, right? I mean, I remember them, 30, 40 years ago, right? So as much as we want to get excited about the connective tissue between the tariffs, logistics, and e-commerce. As much as we want to jump into AI immediately, as much as we want to let AI handle all of these complexities, we have to be absolutely prudent and careful and have the right skills and the right capabilities. Ankit, tell us a few words about that.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. And very great insights from everyone, right? Pavlo mentioned that volatility is the new normal. And at the risk of sounding cliche, AI is also the new normal, right? But you rightly said how you utilize, how enterprises use AI, how it is implemented is the key to kind of success or failure. Right, John very rightly gave some examples of POCs failing for multiple reasons, right? Typically, I look at AI in two ways, right? There are ways where enterprises can use AI for low-hanging fruits, for immediate benefits, where you don't need to, use your own foundational models or use a lot of data. So there are low-hanging fruits that help, increase efficiency or increase accuracy, whatever some operational pain points that you have. A lot of the other challenges that we talk, right? Changes to tariffs, price fluctuations, geopolitical situations. Unfortunately, I don't think AI is intelligent enough to kind of take all of that into, and it's not a magic bullet that would help. But utilizing AI in the right way would help enterprises navigate the challenges around that to make decisions faster, right? Because unlike few years ago, there are different parameters, there are different criteria, there are different impacts that are posing a challenge to making decisions for a business, right? So it is practically very difficult for the decision makers to make decisions with so many different dynamics coming in. With the help of AI, if implemented right, some of those things can relatively easily be handled, right? Dynamic pricing, how do you easily calculate the landed cost? If there are so many different variations, if the tariff changes, if some regulation changes. Ala, you mentioned about governance. Alex, we had done a recent conversation on AI in regulated industries and governance. So governance is one area where AI can certainly help. Right? There are a lot of changes in governance, but you can help. AI can help in ensuring that you are following the regulations and so on. So various different aspects of how you utilize AI, what challenges you want to really take care with all these volatility and dynamics. And if you implement it right, you would certainly get the benefit. That's how I look at, obviously there are challenges, but one of the key challenge, which unlike conventional applications that enterprises implement, right, the proof of concepts, you would typically see immediate ROI. If you implement ERP, if you implement CRM, you'll see some immediate ROIs. AI is one technology where there is a lag in the ROI. Right, depending on how big, how complex AI, what solution what problem you're trying to solve, and that is the ROI lag is what the business does not take into account. Right, you don't always get immediate ROI. After the POC is done, you need some time to kind of have the AI give its benefits. And that's where a lot of the POCs also fail. So these are, implementing AI itself, it has its own playbook, it has its own challenges, and has to be done in the right way.
Excellent. Sort of a summarization of these different challenges, if you will, and how AI can either increase the complexity or can actually relieve that complexity. But certainly we definitely think that, we all think that we can't just jump right into it and put everything into AI and trust it and so forth and trust the data. There's a word hallucination that comes to mind on the regular basis. I was talking to a friend recently who is one of the executives in a very large organization, and some folks are still trying to understand what hallucination means, right? And what is the difference between agentic AI, generative AI, and sort of AI that's based on real data? Those are the very important distinctions, and sometimes those are very important ways to understand and to distinguish them. So let's connect all the dots together. I think we've reached the point where we have it's almost like an amazing game that we're playing here of connecting the dots, right? So Ala, you talked about tariffs that increase costs, and actually now they require logistics to optimize the different logistics flows and maybe even reconfiguration of those logistics flows. You need to optimize, you need to reconfigure, if you will. Then you need to, go back to John, you need to look at e-commerce and retail and rethink the pricing strategies. And you need to worry about the cost optimization. You need to worry about the cost of acquisition of the customer. You need to worry about the loyalties. You need to worry about all of these things that will continue for that customer or B2B partner to continue to buy from you. And that puts more pressure on the marketers, that puts more pressure on the designers of the product, in the product engineering and product management and so forth and so on. And then finally, on top of it, to put the icing on the cake, you have AI as the enabler or as a destroyer if not implemented correctly. So let's put all these pieces together. How can a company, and it is a question for you, how can a company differentiate itself today? And should the company immediately assess its capabilities, assess where it is right now in terms of systems, in terms of people, in terms of skills, in terms of customer loyalties, in terms of all the other things? What should be the remedy, if you will? What should be the plan? Don't be shy. Jump in, anybody.
Well, Alex, I'm happy to jump in. I think we can all agree that the market is not the same today as it was in the past. And I think it's pretty clear that the customer is not the same today as it was in the past. And so given those two sort of foundational realities here, that the things that are just different, I think it's a good time for most people on this call to revisit their customer journey, to get out there again and understand what has changed within the customer's journey, that evolving journey. It's probably a great time to get out there and again talk to your customers, understand their new pain points and what's changed, understand their new issues and opportunities. It's probably a great time to check out the innovation that's going on with your competitors or in adjacent industries. And it's probably a great time to more formally, to Ankit's point, more formally look at an AI strategy, where it was probably on the watch list for a year or two or more. Certainly it was on the watch list with robotic process automation years before AI came out. Now I think it needs to be on the list of actions. And I think if we as advisors and professionals can help our operating companies revisit their total value proposition and their customer experience, then strategies and opportunities are going to become more aware. And from that awareness, then you can build out, your action plan and your timeline and go execute and update your playbook to win.
Anyone else? Please jump in and help us unravel this even more.
Well, nowadays, maybe a good strategy to try help your customers be more successful, more efficient. And since we're at logistics, where in most cases are vendors for large businesses, and we help them with their operations and their operations efficiency. So if we can bring some extra value that will help them be more efficient, save more dollars on each mile, we move goods for them, it will be a good strategy anytime, and now especially when everybody is struggling with extra costs, with raised fuel costs and tariffs and everything. First of all, if you can help your customers be more efficient, it's already one of the opportunities for you to differentiate. And as Ankit mentioned, if you have a clear AI strategy in your company and you know how to implement it, the way you got ROI, you should do it. There is a thought that you either implement AI in your processes everywhere, or you gonna be behind very soon. And I believe in that.
Now, let me ask you, and maybe I'll start with Ala with this question. So it sounds like, and obviously the industries and the AI vendors are telling us on a regular basis, listen, this is it. This is the end. This is the end. Stop. AI is the answer for everything, right? But in reality, AI is not going to necessarily, at least at this stage, is not going to necessarily replace the experts, is it? Allah, for example, in the tariffs, in trade, in export import, in regulations and so forth, can we easily say that, listen, all you need right now is an agentic, you need an AI buddy, so to speak, and that's it. All my tariff cost optimization is done. Is that true?
Yeah, so technology at this point can be a helper for sure, but at this point it cannot do for you full classifications of your product, can predict, can help you, of course, build BI dashboards or any others to help you forecast or help you kind of navigate. So technology is a helper for sure, but you should probably trust it with a dose of kind of verification, or you should also have different options out there. But at this point, technology is, you should invest for sure in various platforms that would help you. But experts are there, and they remain experts at this time, in the time of.
Right. I mean, another example we used is that, let's use AI to, I've heard this from a couple other folks in the logistics space. Let's use AI to reconfigure our complete logistics chains, right? If we were shipping from China, now we can ship from, quickly plug in all the classification tables and see if we can find some logistics companies that can now, instead of China, take us through Vietnam or Canada or Mexico or whatever. And in the end, when you think about it, it's not that simple. Pavel, go ahead.
Well, just to clarify, I'm not saying that you need to implement AI everywhere and replace all your stuff with AI. No, I'm not even saying that we need to replace someone with AI. AI can help us to do some simple tasks easier, faster, more bring more autonomy to some process like tracking, like notifying customers on the delays, like predicting if there is like a delay happening on the route, and so on, as well as it can be heavily involved in matchmaking between freight and vendors with all the predictions and scoring. This is where should you look when you're in logistics or in supply chain industry.
Yeah, very cool.
I absolutely agree. AI is an enabler. It's not something that replaces anyone, right? Maybe some functions or something which is very specific, which is very repetitive, but that has happened across all the years, right? I mean, a few years ago we used to see people, cameramen and helicopters and taking shoots, and now we have drones, right? And so there'll be some functions or some aspects that can easily be done by AI, but AI is not something that would replace the experts. It is there to help the experts take better and faster decision, right? It allows experts to give options that took time earlier. Right, so you talk about rerouting, right? So to do it manually, whether to do it to route it through Vietnam or to route it to somewhere else, those options can now be available very fast. So you have the ability to make decisions faster, right? You have the ability to find out how you can hyper personalize, how you can add value, and what are the things needed to be done there. And that's where AI or any technology would make a difference. It's certainly not a replacement to any experts. That's my opinion.
And John, the last mile of all of this is obviously e-commerce and interface with the consumer and so forth. I remember in the early days of tariffs, Amazon came out and said, we're actually going to publish prices before and after tariffs. And there was an immediate reaction from the White House saying, are you crazy? What are you doing? You can't do that. Walmart, you can't do this, and so forth and so on. But in reality, the prices are increasing. Right? We're seeing the demise of some of the cheaper suppliers like Temu and some of the other ones, right? I'm not sure what's going to happen with the TikTok shop because that's, where that deal is on the table right now. But, it's incredible as to what's happening literally overnight. A few words about that, maybe?
Well, I must say, I respect our administration, but in my opinion, price transparency is very important. It's a bedrock of American commerce. And I'll take as an example, California. To pump gas in your car, you will see at the pump what the gas costs and what parts your dollar is paying for. Is it a national tax? Are you saving the environment? Are you paying for the actual gas? Is it a state tax? And I think consumers value that. I think that's an important piece of information for people. So although perhaps the market hasn't embraced that concept, I actually think if you're thinking customer first, that's a valuable piece of information for customers, and they have a right to that. They should see that. So that last mile is important. Again, though, it starts with just a revisit of the customer experience. Like, how is she or he in B2C or B2B getting through their day-to-day work? And where can we add more value? Where can we make it easier? Like Pavel said, Alla mentioned, that AI can't do it all. No, we need to make some judgment calls and modify our value propositions to most, resonate with our target consumer. And so a lot of that is done in the last mile, in the customer experience, out front doing marketing, and adjusting and tweaking our playbook so we can be as relevant as possible for our customers.
What an amazing discussion. It's coming to an end, unfortunately. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours about this. I'm fascinated by this, but I'm so happy that we were able to demystify and sort of pick apart this very complex relationships between trade, delivery, logistics, the last mile e-commerce, if you will, and the tech that sits on top of all of this and is very much throughout all of this. I want to thank you, our panel of experts. It's been a fascinating discussion. The word to the wise, the word to the companies that are watching this and the people who are watching this, assess yourself immediately. Assess your capabilities. As John said, assess your customer relationship, your journey, the journey of your customer. Look at the costs. Look at the ways that you acquire products and how those products work through the chain, if you will. Talk to people like Ankit about the role of technology and AI in all of these, right? Because you do have legacy systems out there. You're going to have to integrate them. You're going to have to clean the data, or you have to deal with clean data, hopefully, because AI is going to produce even more data for you. And you're going to have to learn and worry about whether this data is based on hallucinations or it's going to be based on reality. Okay, so I want to thank you all for making this very complex environment or very complex topic a simpler one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.